My own promotion dinner, my own team, my own boss sitting 3 feet away with a glass raised to me. And my girlfriend stood up before I could say a single word and announced, in front of all of them, that I was turning the promotion down. Charles already emailed HR this morning, Lauren said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. We talked about it. It's not the right time for us. I hadn't emailed anyone. I hadn't talked about anything. My boss, Marissa, looked at me, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Lauren had sent that email herself. From my account, using a password she wasn't supposed to have, 12 hours before I even sat down at that table. I sat there in my one good blazer in front of 11 coworkers while my girlfriend calmly explained to my boss why I didn't want the thing I had worked 3 years for. I smiled. I made a joke about needing time to think. I got through dinner like nothing had happened. But she had no idea what would happen next. My name is Charles. I'm 34, and until that dinner, most people who knew me would have called me the easiest person to get along with in any room. I manage a small engineering team at a mid-sized logistics tech company in Columbus. I fix problems quietly. I don't raise my voice in meetings. I bring donuts on Fridays for no reason other than that people seem to like it. I think that's part of why nobody around me noticed what was happening in my personal life. People who are calm at work are assumed to be fine everywhere. Nobody checks on the guy who never complains. I met Lauren almost 3 years ago at a mutual friend's housewarming. She was sharp, funny, the kind of person who remembered small details about you and brought them up weeks later in a way that felt like being truly seen. My father had died 8 months before that party, suddenly, of a heart attack, and I was still moving through life like someone walking on a floor that might not hold. Lauren noticed that in me before I said a word about it. She was patient. She sat with me on nights I couldn't talk. She handled things. Funeral paperwork follow-ups, calls to my father's insurance company, conversations with my mother when my mother was too raw to speak to me directly. I owed her something. That's what I told myself for a long time. Not out loud, but underneath everything. The sense that she had carried me through the worst stretch of my life, so the least I could do was let her carry other things too. I want to be honest here because this isn't a story about a perfect man wronged by a monster. I have flaws. I avoid conflict to the point of letting things fester. I say it's fine when it isn't, more times a week than I'd like to admit. I let small disrespects slide because confronting them felt smaller than the relationship itself. Lauren didn't invent that weakness in me. She found it already there, and over time, she used it. It didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with clothes. 8 months in, she began commenting on what I wore before we went anywhere. Not cruelly, always wrapped in concern. That shirt makes you look like you don't try. I switched shirts. It felt easier than the alternative, which was watching her go quiet and cold for the rest of the night. Then it was my friends. My college roommate, Desmond, called one Sunday to invite me to a fantasy football draft. Maureen was in the room. She didn't say no, she just asked, gently, whether I really wanted to spend a whole Sunday with people who don't ask how you're doing, and reminded me I'd said I was tired that week. I texted Desmond and canceled. I did this 4 more times over the next year until he stopped inviting me. Then it was money. She started handling our budget, even though we didn't share an account. She'd tell me which purchases made sense and which didn't, and somewhere along the way, I stopped buying things without mentioning them to her first, the way you'd check with a supervisor before making a call above your authority. Then it was my mother. Lauren decided, without much discussion, that Sunday dinners at my mom's house should become once a month instead of weekly, because you always come back stressed. My mother asked me once, quietly, over the phone, whether everything was okay between us. I told her it was fine. I always told everyone it was fine. Then it was my apartment. We didn't live together, but she had a key, and somewhere in year 2, she started rearranging things while I was at work. Not maliciously, always with a reasonable-sounding explanation waiting for me when I noticed. My grandfather's old fishing photos came down from the hallway because they clashed with everything else. A bookshelf of things from my father got moved into the closet because grief corners weren't good for my mental health. I remember standing in that hallway, looking at the blank wall where the photos used to be, feeling a strange, disproportionate sadness I couldn't explain to myself, let alone to her. There was also the matter of my calendar. Somewhere along the way, Lauren had gotten access to my work calendar. I don't even remember agreeing to that, only that it seemed to happen gradually enough that by the time I noticed, it felt too late to undo without starting a fight. She began declining things on my behalf. A coffee catch-up with a former coworker got moved without my input. A dentist appointment got rescheduled because it overlapped with something she'd planned for us. Small administrative erosions, each one defensible on its own. Each one more decision that used to be mine and now wasn't. I told myself, more than once, that this was just what serious relationships looked like. Compromise, merging two lives into one. I didn't have a framework yet for understanding that compromise runs in two directions, and that in 3 years, I couldn't think of a single decision of hers that had bent toward what I wanted instead of the other way around. Each of these, on its own, was small enough to swallow. That was the design of it, whether Lauren planned it consciously or not. Nothing ever felt big enough to fight over, until the fights had already been fought and lost without me noticing I was in one. The dinner where she declined my promotion for me wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time the pattern happened somewhere I couldn't hide it, in front of people whose opinion of me I couldn't afford to lose. After that dinner, something in me finally went still instead of soft. Not angry, still. The kind of still you get right before you decide to actually look at something you've been avoiding. I didn't confront her that night. I went home, and while she showered, I opened my laptop and logged into my email's activity log, a feature I'd genuinely forgotten existed until that moment. It showed every device, every login, every sent message. There it was, my account, logged in from an unfamiliar device at 7:14 that morning, sending the resignation of promotion email to Marissa. Lauren had my password because, a year earlier, I'd let her help me organize my inbox during a stressful work week. I never changed it after. That alone would have been enough to end things. But once I started looking, I couldn't stop. I found a browser history left open on the laptop we sometimes shared for streaming. Searches for how to transfer money between accounts without a partner noticing, dated 4 months back. I found a folder buried 3 levels deep on our shared cloud drive, labeled simply Personal, Financial Planning 2. Inside it were documents I didn't recognize, a joint checking account application with my name and a signature on it that was not mine, close enough to fool a bank teller glancing at it for 2 seconds, but not close enough to fool me looking at my own name for 10 minutes. The account had been opened 4 months earlier. There was already money in it, money that matched, almost to the dollar, a signing bonus I'd told Lauren about after a small contract project I'd done on the side. Money I had never actually deposited into any account she knew about. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time that night, scrolling back through the folder, trying to figure out how long this version of my life had existed alongside the one I thought I was living. There were bank correspondence emails forwarded to an address I didn't recognize. One letter with my name misspelled by a single letter in a way that suggested whoever filled it out hadn't typed it carefully or hadn't cared to. There was a note, saved as a draft and never sent, that read like Lauren rehearsing an explanation in advance. Something about getting ahead on our future together and not wanting to worry you until it was ready. It wasn't addressed to me. I don't think it was ever meant to be seen by me at all. At least, not yet. Not until whatever this was had grown large enough that unwinding it would have been harder than accepting it. She hadn't just been managing my decisions. She had been managing my identity, one convenient explanation at a time, banking on the fact that I'd trusted her enough for long enough not to check. I didn't yell. I didn't confront her with the folder open on my screen. I closed the laptop, said goodnight, and lay awake most of that night doing math I didn't want to be doing about a person I loved. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. Quiet, methodical, patient in a way that had nothing to do with kindness anymore. I opened a new email account she didn't know about. I photographed every document in that folder with my phone, one page at a time, careful not to change file names or move anything, so nothing would look touched. I called the bank listed on the account application, gave my real ID, and asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether an account had been opened using my name. The representative couldn't tell me details over the phone, but she did confirm, after verifying my identity, that yes, an account existed, and that I should come in with an ID to dispute the signature in person. I went in on my lunch break. The banker slid the original paper application across the counter. My name, my birth date, a signature that curved the wrong way on the C, a small, stupid detail that only someone who'd signed his own name 8,000 times would ever notice was wrong. I filed a formal signature dispute. The bank froze the account pending investigation. I didn't tell Lauren. Over that same stretch of weeks, I started noticing how much easier it was to move through my own life once I stopped narrating every decision to her first. I picked up lunch with a coworker without mentioning it in advance. I went to the hardware store on a Tuesday night just because I felt like fixing the loose cabinet hinge that had been bothering me for a year, and nobody asked me why I needed to. It was such a small thing, buying a screwdriver without checking in, that it embarrassed me a little. How long had it been since I'd made a decision that size without first predicting how she'd react to it? I also started keeping a private log, dated entries on my new email account, of anything that didn't add up. The dentist appointment moved without my input. A car insurance renewal that had quietly switched to a payment plan I didn't remember choosing. A surprise trip she'd once mentioned we were saving for, using an account I now had reason to believe wasn't entirely funded by money either of us had actually earned together. None of it was dramatic by itself. Stacked together, dated and organized, it read like a pattern instead of a series of coincidences, which is exactly what it was. Then I did something I'd never done in 3 years. I called Desmond. I told him everything, start to finish, in one long, unbroken sentence, the way you talk when you've been holding something underwater for too long and finally let it surface. He was quiet for a second, then said something that stuck with me. "Charles, has she ever mentioned an ex named Patrick?" She had. Once, briefly, dismissed as someone from a long time ago who couldn't handle a real relationship. Desmond told me Patrick worked with his cousin. He got me a number. Patrick and I met at a coffee shop on a Wednesday evening, both of us a little unsure why we were actually sitting across from each other. I told him what I'd found. I watched his face change from polite confusion to something closer to recognition, and then to something closer to grief. He'd dated Lauren 4 years before me. Same pattern. The clothes, the friends thinning out, the helping with his finances. But he told me something I hadn't found yet. Near the end of their relationship, Lauren had convinced him to co-sign a car loan to build his credit, using a version of his signature she'd practiced from old birthday cards. When he found out, months later, after the car had been repossessed and the debt collectors started calling him, she was already gone. And already, he later learned, seeing someone else while still technically living with him. He'd never reported it. He told me he was embarrassed, that he thought people would ask why he let it get that far. So he just paid off what he could and disappeared from that part of his life quietly. Here's the part that changed everything for me. Patrick mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he still occasionally saw her name pop up, a mutual friend on social media, an old group chat neither of them had left. 3 weeks earlier, that same friend had posted a photo from a downtown restaurant. Lauren was in the background of it, at a different table, having what looked like a very warm dinner with a man neither of us recognized. I checked the date. It was the same week she'd told me she was handling a stressful project deadline alone and asked me not to come by for 2 nights in a row. She wasn't just controlling my life to manage me. She was running 2 lives at once, and I was apparently not the only man currently being financially organized by her at the same time. I didn't confront her with anger. I confronted her with a folder. I asked her to sit down on a Saturday morning, told her I wanted to talk about next steps for us, and watched her relax into that conversation because it was one she thought she controlled the shape of. Then I put 4 things on the table, one at a time. The email activity log from the promotion dinner, the bank's signature dispute letter, freezing the account opened in my name, a printed statement from Patrick. He'd agreed, after some thought, to write down what happened to him and let me use it if it ever came to that, and the restaurant photo, time-stamped against her own claimed deadline. I didn't shout through any of it. I asked her questions instead. Simple ones. Why was there a device I didn't own logged into my email that morning? Why was my name on a bank account I never opened? Who the man in the photo was? She tried 3 different explanations before she landed on one, and each one contradicted the last in a way even she seemed to hear as she said it. First, that Patrick was lying out of bitterness. Then, that the account was a surprise she was planning for our future. Then, when I read her the exact wording of the email sent to Marissa, that I had basically agreed to it anyway, just never said it out loud. That was the moment I understood the actual scale of what I'd been living inside. She hadn't been protecting me from bad decisions. She'd been quietly building a version of my financial and professional life that existed entirely for her use, backed up in advance with a story about how I'd secretly wanted it that way all along. I didn't need to raise my voice. Her own explanations were doing more damage to her than anything I could have said. I told her I'd already spoken to my bank's fraud department and to Marissa's HR contact, correcting the resignation email on record. I told her the bank would be following up about the signature dispute, independently of anything I did next. I wasn't threatening her. I was simply telling her what was already true and already moving, whether she stayed in that apartment another hour or not. She left that afternoon. Not dramatically, just packed 2 bags and left. The same calm efficiency she'd used to manage everything else in my life, now used to exit it. The bank's investigation confirmed the forged signature within 3 weeks and closed the account, returning the funds to their rightful place. My promotion was reinstated after one slightly awkward but ultimately fine conversation with Marissa, who told me she'd figured something was off that night at dinner, but hadn't known how to ask. Patrick and I stayed in occasional touch. Not close friends, but 2 people who'd recognized something painful in each other and were glad, in a quiet way, to not be carrying it alone anymore. I called Desmond and apologized for 4 years of canceled Sundays. He didn't make it a bigger deal than it needed to be. We're back to drafting fantasy football teams badly together every August. My mother and I go to dinner every week now. I told her most of it, eventually, in pieces, over a few months. She didn't say, "I told you so," even though she'd asked me if I was okay more times than I'd admitted to being not okay. Not everything closed neatly. I don't know what happened to the man from the restaurant photo, and some nights I think about calling to warn him. Then remember, that isn't really my responsibility to carry anymore. Lauren and I never spoke again after that Saturday. I don't wish her ruin. I just don't wish her anywhere near my life. It took months before the apartment stopped feeling strange to me. I put my grandfather's fishing photos back up the same week she left, and my father's box of things came out of the closet and onto the shelf where it always should have stayed. Small things like that mattered more than I expected them to. I started saying yes to plans the same day someone asked me, instead of running them through some invisible approval process first. I told Marissa the truth, eventually, in broad strokes, about why that dinner had gone the way it did, and she told me something I've thought about since, that she'd noticed, over the prior year, how much quieter and more careful I'd become at work, and had assumed it was just my personality, not something happening to me. That stuck with me more than almost anything else. People had been watching a version of me shrink for 2 years, and reading it as who I simply was. What I gained wasn't revenge. It was the strange, late realization that being easy to get along with and being unwilling to protect myself had quietly become the same thing, and that I needed to learn how to separate them. I'm not naturally suspicious now, and I don't want to be. But I've learned to notice the difference between someone asking for my trust and someone quietly assuming it before I've given it. I think about how long I called it fine. The missed Sundays, the shrinking guest list of people I was allowed to see, the small currency of myself I kept handing over because the alternative felt like conflict I didn't have the stomach for. None of it looked like danger while it was happening. It looked like love being careful with me. It took a forged signature to show me the difference. So I'll leave you with the question that's stayed with me since. How many small decisions does someone have to make for you without asking before it stops being care and starts being control? And if you're honest with yourself, would you have noticed the line before it was already crossed?